From the studios of KPFK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles, this is Uprising, and I'm Sonali Kohatkar. It's Tuesday, June 16th, 2015. With the TPP fast-track vote failing in the House, we'll turn once more to activist Margaret Flowers for an update. She's been camped out in front of the Capitol for days, lobbying every member of Congress she can to vote no on the controversial trade deal. And we'll go to Arizona to speak with Francisca Porchas of the Puente Movement to learn why 200 immigrant detainees are on hunger strike at Eloy Detention Center. Plus, hip-hop scholar and activist Rosa Clemente joins us in studio to discuss the scandal over Rachel Doležal and what it means to be black in America. That's coming up after the news. Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Courtney Morris, sitting in for Robert Jensen. She's an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Sonali.
Newly obtained documents from the CIA have been turned over by the ACLU to the Guardian newspaper, and they reveal that the agency not only tortured detainees after 9/11, but effectively turned them into subjects of experimentation. Even though the CIA has a long-standing policy against sponsoring, contracting, or conducting human experimentation, the documents reveal the agency's director has had the discretion to, quote, approve, modify, or disapprove all proposals pertaining to human subject research. CIA doctors operating with the Office of Medical Services, or OMS, were intimately involved in overseeing torture techniques such as waterboarding. They observed the reaction of torture subjects and offered advice on how far a technique could be taken. According to Guardian reporter Spencer Ackerman, the extensive notes from CIA doctors on the interrogations as they unfolded brought OMS into the realm of human experimentation, particularly as they helped blur the lines between providing medical aid to detainees and keeping them capable of enduring further abusive interrogations, end of quote. Well, Courtney, we've known that doctors and psychologists have been involved in the CIA's torture program. Is the term human experimentation a valid one, you think, to describe what they were involved in?
Not exactly. I think the term war crime would probably be more appropriate. The cardinal rule of medical practice is first do no harm. And it's clear that the doctors and psychologists who worked with the CIA to develop these so-called enhanced interrogation techniques clearly did not follow this mandate. We know there have been a number of accounts from former detainees as well as current detainees at Guantanamo and other so-called black sites. And we've learned that, these detainees were basically used as guinea pigs so that the CIA could find out how far it could go in torturing them without actually killing them. And this hardly sounds like first do no harm. And I think as we learn more and more about the CIA's interrogation tactics, what's worst of all is that we know, based on the recent report released by the Senate, that these enhanced interrogation techniques have not, in fact, done much to yield information about terrorist activity or, in fact, to keep the country safe. So it's horrifying to see just how far these doctors have gone.
And an Egyptian judge has just sentenced Mohamed Morsi to death. The Muslim Brotherhood leader technically became the first democratically elected president since the revolution that toppled Hosni Mubarak, although his rule was widely unpopular. After being ousted by the military-dominated regime of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, he has remained in prison. The death sentence is bizarrely linked to a jailbreak during the 2011 Egyptian revolution that toppled dictator Hosni Mubarak. Morsi and many others had been imprisoned without charges at the beginning of the uprising and broke out of prison soon after in a widely publicized incident for which he was never punished and which was never raised before his run for president. Morsi plans to appeal the sentence. Despite the fact that his crimes are a fraction of Mubarak's, he has been sentenced to death, while Mubarak was initially exonerated. Earlier this month, the court announced that Mubarak would face a retrial for his role in violence against protesters. Courtney, is this yet another nail in the coffin of the 2011 Egyptian revolution?
It certainly appears to be so. I think we're really witnessing the reemergence of authoritarian rule in Egypt. And, I mean, certainly there are many fair critiques that one can make of the Muslim Brotherhood, but it seems like the general public in Egypt has really been shocked by the heavy-handed way that the government has been dealing with them. And there seems to be a lot of concern on the ground that this repression is really going to have an adverse effect in terms of radicalizing or rather militarizing younger members of the Brotherhood who are really angry about the treatment that they're receiving at the hands of the state. So this is a very volatile situation, and Western diplomats in Egypt have been hopeful that President al-Sisi will rescind the death sentence in order to avoid exacerbating an already very violent situation.
And finally, yet another GOP hopeful has thrown his hat into the presidential ring. This time it's Jeb Bush, former Florida governor and, more importantly, younger brother of George W. Bush, arguably the most reviled president in U.S. history. In a speech at Miami-Dade College yesterday, the younger Bush promised that as president he would deliver, quote, 4% growth and 19 million new jobs. 20 minutes into his speech, however, he was confronted by pro-immigrant activists demanding humane immigration reform and paths to citizenship. A week ago, Bush faced another challenge during an interview on MSNBC when he was asked to respond to a section from his book, Profiles in Character. In it, he had written a chapter entitled The Restoration of Shame, where he called out single mothers for their, quote, irresponsible conduct. Well, Courtney, it seems like a long road to climb for Jeb Bush to really win over the public. Or is it possible we may see a third Bush take office in 2016?
Sonali, this is America, so anything is possible, even a third Bush administration. But, I think that Jeb's problem is really that he's going to have to try very hard to be all things to all people, and it's not clear yet whether anyone is actually buying. I mean, particularly on the issue of immigration reform, coming from Florida, he's tended to take a much softer approach to immigration than many of his Republican competitors have taken. And I think that that's something that's not going to play all that well to his conservative base and to his own party, which is ultimately who he needs to appeal to in order to win the nomination. On the other hand, he's trying to backpedal on some of the other issues around income inequality, talking about extending opportunity to all Americans and making sure that there's more of a level playing field for all Americans. And at the same time, he's also deeply invested in reinforcing the same policies of free trade and sort of, neoliberal economic reform that everybody is doing. So he's going to have a tough road to hoe moving ahead and really trying to cater to all of the different parties, all the different constituencies that he needs to win over.
Well, Courtney Morris, thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again tomorrow, actually.
Bye, Sonali.
Courtney Morris is an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University, sitting in for Bob Jensen. This is Uprising. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. After days of intensely lobbying members of Congress to vote no on fast-track authority for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, activists declared a victory. The vote failed on Friday in the House when Democrats defied President Obama. Counting Republicans House Speaker John Boehner and Representative Paul Ryan as his main allies on the TPP, Obama seems to have alienated his own base. The Senate passed fast-track authority last month, 62-37. So, now what? Last Thursday, we spoke with Margaret Flowers, who, along with a number of her colleagues, has been camped outside the Capitol, intercepting members of Congress to lobby them one by one to vote no on fast track. And today we catch up with her once more to get an update. Dr. Margaret Flowers is an activist with popularresistance.org and flushthetpp.org. She's written extensively and spoken extensively about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and fast track. Welcome back to the show, Margaret.
Good morning. Thank you for having me back.
So what happened on Friday? Now, organized labor and AFL-CIO in particular are taking credit for why the House vote failed. I would like to think you might have had something to do with it as well.
I think what we're seeing right now is an incredibly broad coalition of people from across the political spectrum, as well as across the issues that we care about: food, health, environment, jobs, more than that. And so I think collectively, the pressure that we put on members, the phone calls that we've made, has had a tremendous impact. On Friday morning, we were feeling somewhat pessimistic about what would happen, particularly when we saw that President Obama made a special trip to the Capitol to twist arms and urge the Democratic caucus to vote for fast track.
So the vote didn't just fail by a small margin, it was a substantial margin, right?
Well, it's an interesting situation right now because the Senate passed two bills together as one bill. One's called the Fast Track Bill, TPA, and the other is a trade assistance bill for people who lose their jobs because of these trade agreements. And in the House, they separated them so that the trade assistance one actually lost by a huge majority. 302 members voted against it to 126. And then quickly after that, they voted on the Fast Track or TPA bill and passed that just by one vote over the majority they need. They passed it with 219 votes.
So at this point, what is the situation? Is there going to be another vote? Is this a done deal or is it still alive?
It's still alive, and we're getting very mixed reviews from members on what they think the situation actually is. So we may actually learn today at 12 noon, the members are going over Eastern time to vote again. So basically on Friday when we talked to members who were coming out, some said this is very sad, fast track passed. Others were saying, well, it's still alive, but it's on life support. Others said keep pushing. Through the weekend, activists continued to generate tens of thousands of phone calls into Congress. Congresswoman Pelosi's mailbox was completely full, couldn't take any more messages. She started saying over the weekend that she was willing to negotiate and help Fast Track get through if she could get a highway spending bill. And then we hear from the Republican leadership that they don't believe they can negotiate with Congresswoman Pelosi in good faith because she voted against the Fast Track and the trade assistance bill after they had gone through this long process of giving her what she wants. So basically what happened on Friday is Speaker Boehner filed a motion to reconsider, and that typically means that there has to be a vote within 48 hours. Now they get the weekend off, so that doesn't count. So we expected when members came back yesterday that they might vote on it then, a revote, and then we also expected a revote today. What happened last night is that they slipped a provision in to another bill that they're voting on today, saying that they have until the end of July to vote on trade assistance. So it's that could happen. They could vote on TAA today, the trade assistance. They could extend it to July. We really don't know what's going to happen right now.
What do you make of Hillary Clinton speaking out on this issue? If she were president, I imagine she wouldn't do anything less than what Obama is trying to do to get TPP pushed. But of course, as a candidate, she used to sell herself to the public. This is a highly unpopular bill. So she said something to the effect that she would insist that American workers were protected and that wages raised in any deal that she as president would sign. What do you think?
I think we heard similar promises from President Obama when he was campaigning, how he was going to redo NAFTA so that, it would be much more fair. 45 times Hillary Clinton has come out in favor of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think that she sees the political wind is blowing against it, and she wants to be on riding that.
And then Larry Summers, Obama's former economic advisor and good friend, wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, and his argument was bizarre. He basically said repudiation of the TPP would neuter the U.S. presidency for the next 19 months. So basically, he wants Congress to vote for it because otherwise it would embarrass his friend.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, President Obama is going into a lame duck session. We don't expect anything big to come out of that. This is a very dangerous legacy for him. If this fast track passes and it results in the passage of these three huge international agreements that will profoundly affect our lives and the lives of people around the world, that would be a very bad legacy for President Obama. So the best thing for him and for all of us is if this goes down.
So, Margaret, what's next? Are you still out camping out in D.C. in front of the Capitol? Will there be, are you still lobbying members of Congress? And also, what do you expect now from those of us who are outside Washington, D.C.? And what would you like to see happen in solidarity?
Thank you. We came back early yesterday morning so we could be there when the Congress members arrived. We've been there ever since, and so we can interact with them frequently. We are holding signs on the driveway as they come in. Some of them stop, some walk across, so we talk to them. We've been urging people to continue to make calls. What's really interesting is that we have a situation where they lost the vote last Friday. The trade assistance bill was overwhelmingly voted down, and now they're trying to use these kind of maneuvers to bend the rules and give themselves more time to be able to try to convince people to vote for it. And we think that's a very rigged way to address a rigged way of dealing with rigged trade deals. It's just it's a form of cheating in our eyes, and we say they should just accept the fact that they lost the trade assistance and move on, and let us work to create what we call a 21st century type of trade that takes into account the real issues of globalization and the impact that has on worker rights and wages around the world, as well as the climate change. So we are urging people to continue calling. Very simple message: don't delay. Vote today on TAA. If you do that, we expect it to be lost.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Margaret, for everything you've done and for joining us today and helping us try to make sense of what's happening in DC. Thanks so much. My guest, Margaret Flowers, is camping out in Washington, D.C. She is an activist who is with popularresistance.org and flushthetpp.org, and she's written and spoken extensively about Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. This is Uprising. Later in the hour, Rosa Clemente joins us in studio to discuss the curious case of Rachel Doležal. After this break, we'll find out why 200 immigrants in a detention center in Arizona are on hunger strike. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. The president of the Spokane, Washington chapter of the NAACP has resigned after she broke the internet when her parents outed her as white. I'm, of course, referring to the controversy over Rachel Doležal, a woman who, at first glance, appears as a light-skinned, mixed-race person of African-American heritage. Releasing photos of Doležal in her younger days, her parents have said she's not remotely black, and certainly in those earlier photos, she has white, freckled skin and straight blonde hair, appearing like nothing other than a white woman. Doležal, in her resignation, which she posted to Facebook, took credit for raising the profile of the Spokane NAACP office. In her letter, she referred to the construct of race. Doležal is also an instructor in Africana Studies at the Eastern Washington University, where she has taught African and African-American art history, African-American culture, and the Black women's struggle, as well as Intro to African Studies. On her faculty website, the university lists on her bio that there have been, quote, at least 8 documented hate crimes targeting Doležal and her children. She obtained her master's in fine art from Howard University, which is a historically black school, but when she was a student there, she was herself a white woman who was simply painting black subjects in her art. Yesterday, it was revealed that Doležal actually sued Howard University, claiming she was discriminated against because she was white. Somewhere along the way, when she moved to Spokane, Washington, she decided to perm her hair and darken her skin and, quote, become black, a phenomenon that some have coined reverse passing. In a series of high-profile TV interviews yesterday, she continued to maintain that she identifies as black. Well, the case of Rachel Doležal has raised many questions around race and racism, particularly given the national dialogue on police violence against African Americans. My guest is Rosa Clemente, community organizer, freelance journalist, and hip-hop activist, 2008 Green Party vice presidential candidate, and a doctoral candidate in the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies at UMass Amherst. She's currently a visiting scholar at the Department of Pan-African Studies at Cal State LA. Welcome to Uprising, Rosa.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. Well, ever since the story broke last Friday, it's just been going round and round in my head. It's been making me a little bit angry, raising my blood pressure, looking at my Facebook feed, looking at what you've been saying. I think there's definitely similar issues. I know that this is something that you've tackled with personally for a long time, the issue of identity and how people look at blackness in America. So let me just ask you, first of all, broadly speaking, what your overall impressions are of not just this woman who continues to say she identifies as black, but also about the discourse that has come about around her.
Well, I mean, I think she's a liar. I think she's a thief. I think she's an ethnic gentrifier. I think she's performing in blackface. I met Rachel 4 months ago, maybe late January myself, when I went to speak at Eastern Washington University with the Department of Film Studies, Chicano Studies, and the Africana Studies Department. I had dinner with her, and I told my husband when I came home, I said, oh, she's one of those type of white girls. And for my community...
You saw her as a white girl?
Yeah, well, in my community, or from where I come from, we see white women like that all the time, right? Like, people who... You're like, they're not, I don't think they're fully black, most likely biracial, or maybe just one of those white women that has culturally connected herself to blackness, either by growing up in a black community, by adopting by adopting effect, and all of that kind of stuff. Now, that's not a question you asked, all right? You don't go, hey, by the way, what are you? Especially for us, as people of color, we don't like that question being asked to us, right? And that's not how the conversation was. It was an academic gathering, dinner, whatever. But I did say to my husband, oh, she's like one of them type of white girls. She's either like white and grew up in the hood kind of thing and has committed herself to social justice and racial justice. And there's white people in black studies all the time, right? That's not like a phenomenon.
Right.
Or I was like, oh, she's biracial. Why I told him this was because when we were having dinner, she questioned Latinos and Latinas being in the Black Lives Matter movement. And I said, well, yeah, that's what I'm here to talk about, right? How we, as Afro-Latinos, is not just about identifying as black. Many of us are African descendant. We are racially black. If we are in our homelands and look phenotypically black or are African descendant, we are subjected to white supremacy and oppression and imperialism. It doesn't play out the same for us as Afro-Latinos in the U.S., But as someone who knows that Latino or being Puerto Rican or Hispanic is not a race, I've identified as black, racially black, ever since I came into the consciousness of who I was. I would never call myself an African American. I don't have that experience at all. So I think why people are so livid with her as well is that she lied, and nobody's taking on the lie. It's not a matter if you're a white person doing the work of racial justice. I can name 100 white people right now.
And we need those
And,
folks.
and it's not
They're
about their
important.
allies, their accomplices, but they don't go around hiding who they are,
Right.
lying, being deceitful. And lastly, imagine how her students feel. I was there in Spokane. I've been talking to people every day on the ground. Her students feel duped. They feel like they've been played. They've been told by her on some occasions that they cannot participate in certain things because they are not Hispanic enough looking or black enough. This is from her students in her department.
So she herself judged people by the color of
Yes,
their skin.
that dinner that I had with her. Well, I said, there's right now the contention within Black Lives Matter of, I was saying to her, we can't narrow what blackness is at this moment. We have to expand blackness on a global level. And, she had expressed basically, again, that Latinos and Latinas don't fit that category.
But given where she was coming from, you might have expected that she would actually agree with you on this point that you're making, but she took a position of adamance.
A super, what we would call in the academy, a super narrow blackness.
And now she is upset that people are being so narrow.
She's not only upset, I just saw the interview she did. The woman won't even apologize.
Yeah.
Our community has forgiven. Collectively, how much do we forgive?
Yeah.
And the arrogance, the pathology of it all. It's just so ugly, and I think for women of color, it is so infuriating. Because as one of my friends said, here's a white woman pretending to be black getting more airtime than most black or women of color that are doing amazing work every day ever get.
Now, Rachel Doležal said to her critics, quote, maybe think about W.E.B. Du Bois, who said race is usually biological, always cultural. You're a doctoral candidate in the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of African American Studies at UMass. What do you make of her quoting him?
Well, I think it's smart.
Yeah.
She has studied black people. Well, there's no getting around that. But look, even Du Bois, I would gather at this moment in history, when he said that, there was also a fight to fight pseudoscientific racism, to fight how black people were treated because of biological, excuse me. But I also know, and I believe, being in this department, knowing Du Bois, where he was going and where we are now, it's a lived experience. And the fact is that at any moment she can go into a beauty salon and become the white woman that she was and go out there, change her name. She might not even have to change her name. And there are going to be opportunities afforded to a woman.
She likely might, people are saying that she might get a movie deal.
Of course, she's movie,
gonna...
and even if she doesn't take it, right, this is something that's interesting. She will always be able to still work. There will be somebody, particularly in our community, that will say she has something to offer.
Now, she has been compared to the case of Caitlyn Jenner, who transitioned into a trans woman, and people have suddenly brought up this term of transracial. Well, if you can accept Bruce Jenner turning into Caitlyn Jenner, why can't you accept Rachel Doležal, the white woman who says she's black?
Because it's just wrong. It's just, this idea of transracial, I already said, can we just end that? Before it even begins. We made a mistake with post-racial, stop with the transracial. And I think it's a disservice to compare what she has done to the experience of people who are transgender, people who are struggling. And even though we are seeing the transgender experience right now through a Caitlyn Jenner, who has enormous resources, that pain is palatable to so many who do work around social justice. But for transgender people, particularly in the Black Lives Matter movement, who have been on the front lines, taken leadership, including undocumented and the Unafraid movement, right? That is a lot of queer, Latino, Latina, transgender folks. To equate those with someone who She lied. She never had to say she wasn't white. She wouldn't have been judged in our communities.
Right. She didn't go through a process of transitioning from white to black. She did it. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, I mean,
although she's
it's
going to
just-
go
it's
into,
a really
she
interesting.
could potentially go into like the transition of becoming the white woman that she really is.
Yeah, she could certainly transition back whenever she wanted. You know, I believe she was asked in these interviews yesterday about what she did to change her appearance, and I'm curious about that because if she was indeed wearing some kind of bronzer or spray tan to darken her skin, that's called blackface, and her own brother said that.
That's what I said. This is what I'm saying. When I saw her and I went home and told I said, she's one of the white girls, you know, she kinked up her hair. This is the language I use. Might not be politically correct for the audience right now, but I'm talking to my husband. And I said, and that tan needed to be better. I said, that tan needed to be better. It was matte orange.
So you saw through her?
Well,
like
I didn't think there
others
was anything to see through.
because you didn't ask
Right,
her because it wasn't a
I
polite
had just
test.
met her. And again, in our...
At that time, you didn't know she was identifying to the world as black?
No, I didn't know. She didn't like say at that dinner like, by the way, I'm black. I just truly assume, as I said, a white woman who has culturally or has connected herself to the black struggle. And to me, that's nothing new. Because at that point, then I work off politics. And then the politics she was pushing of this narrow blackness made me like, and then when she came to the lecture the next day, and then subsequently I heard that she wasn't too happy with what I said, but in particular had been trying to keep Tim Wise, who had been there a couple months before me, from not coming to the campus
And
at
he's
all
a white anti-racist
and
activist.
she wanted him not to speak because she didn't feel that there should be white people that speak.
Wow.
So I had said to Tim yesterday, I said, look at that. Isn't that, I mean, yeah, it's just a wow moment.
Wow.
When you hear that.
You know, she is alleged to have been the victim of several hate crimes which were under investigation that the local Spokane police have now suspended investigation of. And, you know, of course, now everything is in question. Could she have made all of that up? If so, how seriously does that actually harm the work of people of color who have real hate crimes to report against them? She claimed to have received nooses and packages in the mail. It all was under investigation. How do you take that?
I don't know if that's true or not. I'm resonant to believe anything that she has to say. I think that's a lot of reporting of a lot of hate crimes for one person. And, you know, I also think Spokane, when I was there are a lot of amazing women of color, from the students to the professors to the elders. I mean, I met with so many of them, you know, and yeah, so I don't want to say that what happened to her didn't happen. What I'm saying is I think it does make it harder, and it always gives particularly law enforcement an excuse to say, well, you know, these weren't real before. How are they real now? But also the effect that this has left in the community. I don't think people are understanding that it is a small community of like women of color that are like-minded, and I think they are reeling right now from the deceit that they were under too.
Now, could this impact the struggle that other light-skinned or lighter-skinned mixed-race women have in trying to get people to accept who they are? I saw one article by a woman who is a light-skinned African-American, and she said, you know, this just makes my life harder because already I was being questioned and my race or my own identification as a woman of color was being questioned. Now this deception makes it even worse.
I think so. I mean, as this was breaking, I said, man, I'm going to have a hard time now telling people who I am and what I am, you know, and I think most of it will be in jokes and facetious, and will be all these people coming together and making that, are you really black? Who's really black? In between our communities. But I think the larger impact that it does have on those that have been viewed as wanting to pass, for Latinos and Latinas who are emerging into an Afro-Latino identity, accepting African as their ancestry, but also accepting black as their politic. I think it's going to make it extremely difficult, and it enrages me that this one person that says she was there to uplift racial justice might have set things back in how we view each other as a global black diaspora.
So some folks have also tried to simply draw an analogy between what she did and what light-skinned African Americans have done for a long time, who have attempted to pass as white. And in an interview that Melissa Harris Perry did with an author on this subject, that was discussed. And we know historically, of course, being a member of an oppressed minority, to be able to pass as somebody who does have privilege can also mean the difference between being able to feed your family and not. And so, how do you respond to people who say, well, this is just reverse passing?
No, again, I think that it doesn't take into consideration the historical reason why people who were light-skinned, those that, especially coming out of slavery, passed. This was life and death for people, right? This was between, do I eat today? Do I get that job making 5 more cents an hour or $1 extra a week because I can be in the front of the house and I could feed my family a little more? There's nothing that she did that was about life and death.
Yeah, I'm thinking of
and it's not in a historical context. And in fact, Charles Blow yesterday, I was watching him on CNN when Michaela Angela Davis on Anderson Cooper was saying that you can connect to the Black experience, but there's also a historical legacy and a generational passing down of the history and the requiem of the culture and the freedom struggle that you cannot adopt if you haven't been part of that.
Melissa Harris Perry says she says it's important for us. There's useful language in the term trans and cis, which is to say that some of us are born cisgendered, some of us are born transgendered. But I wonder can it be that one will be cis black and trans black? There's actually a different category of blackness that is about the achievement of blackness despite one's parentage. And she actually asked the question: is it possible that she might actually be black? And I know a lot of folks were kind of disappointed.
Yeah,
with her.
a lot of people pushed back, and I'm glad they did. I think she was wrong. I think that's when academics try to theorize and logic this too much. And this idea of it becoming black. I think politically, if black is a political condition, that can shift for a collective group of people. But an individual person, like Rachel, no. No, that is not language that we should be using. I think there's better language and discourses that we can come up with, rather this idea of white people all of a sudden becoming black. Like, what's the political condition that makes them that?
And there are a lot of folks who have tried to apologize for her, saying, well, the fact that she was doing good work on Black Lives Matter and all of this should be all that should speak for itself. But then yesterday we hear that when she was a white student at Howard University, or I believe she was also a teaching instructor, she sued the college because she says that the rescinding of her positions there was anti-white discrimination, reverse racism, and we know who uses that language. It's a right wing. It's a lot of sort of racial justice folks who've traditionally used that language. It's interesting to see that it seems as though she has done what she can to take advantage of the winds as they blow.
Yeah, isn't it convenient that at that moment you're white? Yeah. At the moment that you can allegedly sue, when the lawsuit was thrown out, that you're white. That's the epitome of white privilege.
And then when it was convenient, she was black. Because there was a position probably
in Africana studies that should have been held for a woman of color, right? So there's so many dynamics at play here. But this idea, again, of white people in social justice, because some people want to say folks like us, no. Like I said, I can name you a David Gilbert, a Laura Whitehorn, a Lynn Stewart, a Chris Kratz, Tim Wise, J. Love Calderon, Marcella Renal. I could go down the list in my circle alone of hundreds of white people that literally not only have risked their freedom, put their lives on the line, continue to be allies, continue to be accomplices in the struggle for racial justice. The main thing is that they don't come lying about it. They're not feeling guilty about the whiteness.
They're not trying to be black. They're trying to be white allies.
Which is also white,
extremely valuable.
Not only even allies. I'd push further and say actual accomplices. David Gilbert sits and is incarcerated. Laura Whitehorn did 20 years. Lynn Stewart did time. Marilyn Buck. We could go on and on. It's never been about that. But when you do the work of social justice, it's about being your authentic self. And she broke every rule.
Yeah. What do you make of the hilarious Twitter responses over the weekend? Hashtag Ask Rachel. I'm wondering if you've seen those.
I mean,
And Black Twitter has been so
you can't
active.
mess with Black Twitter. You cannot mess with Black Twitter. If I ever
Nothing
run
is
for
sacred.
office, it'll be Black Twitter that gets me in there, I swear. Part of me, I have a heart, but I guess because I did recently meet her, and I even on my personal experience have found her to be a little off-putting and arrogant, and then with the question, I don't have any sympathy for that. I would have sympathy of people who are making fun and the memes, and I think part of that is expressing pain, disbelief. I don't like the ones that are about violence in any way or come at her as a woman. But there's a lot of pain that she has caused. And I think within the historical moment of Black Lives Matter, a system that is trying to find everything to end that movement. And not that she's going to end that movement, but she's going to throw so much into it that's unnecessary for us to be talking about. Like, we're talking about it and we're down, and this is what we do. But I'm sure you have 9 million other stories that you want to touch on.
Some folks have
as
said
well.
that this is a distraction from the real issues facing people like police violence. But I think the fact that it has come at this moment and allows us to discuss this issue of what the U.S. dialogue, what the American dialogue
Yes.
on race and racism is quite useful, because people's reactions to her story have, I think, been very instructive and very illustrative of
I
where
agree,
people still
and I
are.
agree with that analysis 100%, right? This will be gone in the next week or so, and we'll still be struggling around the issues of racial justice. I think it will make it a little harder, but I always think in the hard places is where you find gaps that have been missing in the kind of conversations we could have as well.
Now it'll be interesting to see what she does in the next phase of her life, because that might be a true test of her sincerity. If she claims indeed a Black identity, it'll also be interesting to see if she continues to keep her appearance the way it is. And also how the rest of the world treats her, and what sort of privileges, now might be that convenient moment for her to become white again once she's been out.
I think she's pretty clear that this is how she will maintain. And like I said, the interview I saw this morning as I was coming here, there was no apology, no accountability, no looking in the camera and saying, there's something in me that just felt so connected to the Black experience, and I apologize. Nothing.
Right.
And I mean, the next
People
level
would have
to that
forgiven
is
her had she apologized.
That's what I'm saying. Even now, you'd be like, okay, well, finally, and now just step back.
Yeah.
Stop taking all the air. Have accountability. But come on, this is the basic thing we teach our children. You do something wrong, you sincerely apologize, and then you begin to make amends. How can you even be and then you give all your first interviews to white journalists as well? I mean, I think that's very there's
telling.
a lot of Black and journalists of color, progressive ones, that could have probably done an amazing interview and really unpacked this for everybody.
Yeah. I don't know. I think if she had been sitting in front of me, I would have. I don't know what I would have asked her, but it would have been different. It would have been difficult for me to not be angry.
I think you would have done a great interview.
But Rose, I want to thank you so much for joining us
thank you
today
for
and helping us
having me.
unpack some of these issues.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
My guest is Rosa Clemente. She is a hip-hop scholar and activist and a journalist, and of course she was the 2008 Green Party vice presidential candidate. She's also a doctoral candidate in the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies at UMass Amherst, currently a visiting scholar at the Department of Pan-African Studies at Cal State LA. This is Uprising. We'll be right back to talk about why 200 immigrant detainees are in Eloy Detention Center in Arizona on hunger strike. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kohatkar. A 31-year-old Mexican man named Jose de Jesus Denis Sahagun died in federal custody in Arizona last month at the Eloy Detention Center. The man had been taken into custody after being picked up by Border Patrol, and he had twice before entered the U.S. without papers. His death prompted a major action over the weekend at Eloy Detention Center, which lies 60 miles north of Tucson in Arizona. 200 detainees have gone on hunger strike, some of whom say that shortly before he died, Denis Sahagun was beaten by guards before being placed in solitary confinement, and that they heard him scream for help. In retaliation for the hunger strike, the immigrants were apparently locked outside in 100-degree weather for 6 hours. They want an independent investigation by the U.S. Justice Department of his death. Eloy is run by the Corrections Corporation for America. Local press in Arizona are reporting that Denis Sahagun was the fourth undocumented person to die inside a detention center this year alone. My guest is Francisca Porchas, organizing director with Puente Human Rights Movement in Arizona. Welcome to Uprising, Francisca.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Well, first, are the 200 detainees still on hunger strike, or was it done for a short period of time? What's the status?
We haven't gotten a full report yet. As of last night, we started getting a few calls. Loved ones started getting a few calls. The entire center was on lockdown. All family visits were completely canceled, and all calls were prohibited up until last night. So we're still unclear on how many folks are still on hunger strike. Hopefully we'll get more calls today.
And what is the sort of rule around the reporting of hunger strike? Is it that detainees have to refuse a certain number of meals before it's considered a civil disobedience type action?
Definitely. According to ICE rules, it has to be 72 hours before they consider it a hunger strike, which is crazy. And so we also heard, we haven't confirmed this yet, that they have to sign an actual document saying that they're refusing meals. So at this point, ICE has actually put out that there is no hunger strike. The Salvadorian consulate went yesterday, and they also are saying there's no hunger strike. I don't know what kind of relationship they have with ICE, but there is a hunger strike. We have confirmed it because we were out there for, actually it was more than 6 hours, about 8 hours with the hunger strikers. And they had agreed that they were going to continue for a while. So now we're just kind of waiting to hear from them that they've broken it or they continue it.
What do people think happened to Jose Denis Sahagun? Do they think that he died from injuries sustained after being beaten by guards? Is there a possibility he might have committed suicide?
Yes, absolutely. We started getting letters, anonymous letters from the detention center. That's how we knew that there was going to potentially be a hunger strike. Very explicit one saying that he had gotten terrible beating. He had gotten mazed. He had gotten stripped down naked by the guards and thrown into solitary confinement. And yes, when they went in, they found him dead.
Wow. And are there rumors that it might have actually been two men who died, not just the one?
Yes, so the letters also talked about a second person that had gotten a horrible beating, a person that had a pacemaker, that they were really worried about their safety. They didn't name him, they didn't say his name, but that's why we're asking for an independent investigation. And they said that this person was crying for mercy and that they're not clear who it was. And they've asked questions and nobody's given them any answer. So they're worried that there's a second person that died and that there hasn't been any reporting on it.
So there are 4 documented cases of people dying within detention centers this year alone?
Yes, that's something that ICE has actually explicitly put out. For us, we're really worried about the excessive use of force. Obviously, death is the worst thing that could happen, but there's so many varying degrees before you actually get to death. And so we're asking for an independent investigation by the Department of Justice, specifically Vanita Gupta, who is the Assistant Attorney General of the United States, to come in. She has a record of looking into detention centers and actually penalized one, sued one, and got them penalized for about 3 years. And we're hoping that she can come down here and do an investigation.
That's right. She was instrumental in helping to shut down the Don Tijato detention center in Texas. Now she's in a position of power within the Obama administration. So what specifically are you also asking for from the Justice Department as a whole? Under Eric Holder, it's possible he paid some lip service to some issues of civil rights. But nobody really knows yet what Loretta Lynch, as the new Attorney General, might do. But you want the DOJ to come in and do an investigation as well?
That's correct. Unfortunately, Eric Holder came and did an investigation on Arpaio and the racial profiling, and we were hoping that besides saying that it was the worst case of racial profiling that he had ever seen in the history of his work, he did nothing, unfortunately, to stop him. And so we're hoping that with this new leadership, and specifically with Vanita Gupta, that she will actually come down here and do a real investigation, and that there will be some real consequences. What we want ultimately is for all detention to be shut down. We think that it's unnecessary. We think that people linger and linger waiting on court cases, and it's double punishment in a lot of ways.
Right, and let's bring that up because that might sound like a radical demand, but the fact is that immigrants who are undocumented have committed a civil offense, technically not a crime. That's why they're called detainees and not prisoners. And there's a sense that they're being locked up to simply discourage more undocumented folks from coming across the border rather than because they've done anything wrong or because they might actually deserve to be in detention. Is that accurate?
That's correct. We've done some pushback to say that detention is not detention. Detention is prison. So if you even ever visit Eloy Detention Center or any of the media visit detention center, it's a prison. The Eloy Detention Center is a prison, and our people are prisoners, and they're treated as such, right? And we also have done some pushback to say our people are incarcerated, and it goes beyond detention. And also a lot of our people are in there because of their undocumented. All of them are in there because of their undocumented status. Some of them are squeaky clean. Some of them just crossed the border and they're in detention. Some of them have been here a couple of years. They were caught driving without a license. They're in detention. And some of them have committed crimes, and people make mistakes, and there are offenses, and they've done jail time for that crime, or maybe they've done prison time. But what it is that if you have a record, regardless if it was 18, 20 years ago, it still pops up, and as an undocumented person, it adds to sentencing. So it's almost like a replication. You're replicating the prison system and the sentencing system. And then to add insult to injury, they get no due process. So if we think about it, as you said, right, detention and immigrations and customs, it's a civil offense, but it has huge criminal consequences and implications, but they don't get due process. They're literally lingering in detention because they've decided they don't want to be deported and they want to fight their case. So they're waiting and waiting for judges to actually see them. Only 5 judges oversee 1,000 inmates in Eloy Detention Center, and they don't get a public defender either.
What are the detainees telling you about general conditions? If the death of this one particular man is the extreme end of the spectrum, what does the rest of the spectrum of treatment and conditions look like?
There's definitely excessive use of force. As you said, they were locked out for 6 hours in the sun. If they're that emboldened to be that repressive or oppressive out in the open when everybody's looking, there's a lot of excessive use of force inside, a lot of racism and racial slurs. As small as the water has a lot of chemicals. I've seen people break out in hives and have a lot of stomach aches and digestive problems because there's a lot of chemicals in the water. They're also made to work 8 hours a day for $1 a day. As you know, the women in Berks County right now are a work strike because they're made to work, and it's voluntary, but not really. A lot of those letters said it's not really a voluntary program. You're very much pushed into working 8 hours a day for $1 a day. It's hypocrisy. If you're not allowed to work outside because you're undocumented, how is it totally legal to work inside a prison as an undocumented person? Why? Because you can be paid $1 a day for 8 hours a day.
Meanwhile, of course, Corrections Corporation of America is getting several $100s a day per detainee to house them and feed them, and these are, of course, our tax dollars.
Aside from all the money they're saving on not having to hire all the help.
Right, because they're getting the immigrants to do the work for $1 a day. And this is a for-profit corporation, of course. Now, I understand that your organization, Puente, is also asking for a meeting with acting ICE field director in Phoenix, Albert Carter, and that there's a petition that is available for people to sign. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so we're asking folks to both sign the petition and call him. The petition is on notonemoredeportation.com, and it also is going to be CC'd to Vanita Gupta at the DOJ. And we're also asking people to call Albert Carter at 602-766-7018. He is, at the end of the day, the big boss. He is the one that can meet with CCA and hold them accountable. We're asking him to meet with the hunger strikers in good faith and hear them out, hear their demands, and stop denying that there's a hunger strike, and actually acknowledge the risk that these people have taken and how they put their body on the line.
So repeat that phone number again, Albert Carter's phone number.
Yes, that's 602-766-7018.
602-766-7018. And if our audience is driving at this moment or doesn't have a paper and pen, just check uprisingwithsonali.com later today, and we'll post this phone number along with notonemoredeportation.com, where people can find the petition. Again, Albert Carter is the acting Phoenix ICE field director, so he is essentially supposed to be directly overseeing the conditions at this detention center. And so I'm assuming that at some point later today or this week, you'll be in touch with those who are inside to find out whether the strike still continues, whether there's been any more retaliation?
Yes, that's correct. Today we have a very good alliance with certain attorneys. I don't want to put out their names because I don't want them to be noticed. And they're going to go in today and meet with some of those strikers and make sure that they're okay and give us some news of where things are at. We don't have access, of course, because only people that are attorneys or legal organizations can go in.
And give out the website for your organization as well, Puente, Francisca.
Yes, that's www.puenteaz.org.
That's puenteaz.org. And where can listeners and viewers also find out about the Berks County work stoppage that you just briefly mentioned?
Yes, it's a really awesome organization that's part of the Not One More Deportation campaign, which is a national campaign. They're called Juntos, Juntos. Juntos. I don't remember their website, but if you look them up, they're in Philadelphia, and they're the ones supporting the women.
Well, I want to thank you so much for the work that you do and for joining us today. Francisca, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sonali.
My guest is Francisca Porchas. She's an organizing director with Puente Human Rights Movement in Arizona, and we're talking about the fact that 200 immigrant detainees at Eloy Detention Center, ELOY, Eloy Detention Center in Arizona, went on hunger strike on Saturday. It's still not clear whether that strike continues. We'll certainly continue to report on this story. I want to thank you so much, all of you, for listening to this program and also watching. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to at youtube.com/uprising with Sonali, your subscription sustains the production of our television program. This is Uprising. Anna Buss is our assistant producer and our technical director. Christian Beck is our production coordinator. And special thanks to Jonathan Alexander. Federico Garcia is our audio engineer. Annie Mendoza is our social media coordinator. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com, and our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. I'll see you next time.